welcome to Creative Conversations. I'm absolutely honoured today to have Piers Adams join me for a chat, and it's a chat I've been looking forward to for a long time. First of all, I didn't realise there were so many different recorders. I thought I'd only ever had the vision of the one in school, and that some of them were giant, and some of them were tiny, like smaller than what's behind you. And then you have some that are what, 3 foot long? Is that right?
Yeah, 3-4 feet long. I mean, they go up bigger than that. They're like super contrabass recorders that you have to stand on the stool to play. There's really, I think the tallest one's about 12 feet tall. Ridiculous.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
seriously. Yeah,
So
it's like a massive great organ pipe, basically.
Yeah, right. Gosh, it must be incredibly deep, resonant.
Yeah, it does. Doesn't make a lot of sound, to be honest, but it's got an amazing amazing depth to it.
Like a giant didge.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
And what attracted you to recorder? Like, were you playing other instruments prior to that?
No, I started off, I mean, we're going back to about age 11, 12, and I was taking drumming lessons. That's where my musical journey started, and that was just out of a kind of interesting glam rock bands back in the 70s, wanting to be a rock drummer. That didn't last very long because the lessons were really, really dry. And I went to my head of music at school and said, I want to learn something more melodic. I didn't really know what. And he said, well, how about just carrying on with the recorder? And I said, well, can you do that? I didn't know you could do that.
Yeah.
And he said, come on, I'll So he started teaching me, and it turned out he was a big early music nut. And he was someone who'd been following the English musician David Munro, who was really popular in the 70s and 80s. 70s, sorry, he died tragically early in the 70s, but he was very popular as a Radio 3 presenter. He presented loads and loads of programs about early music, and he really produced a movement of people who are really fascinated in these old and wonderful instruments.
Wow.
Anyway, my head of music was a big fan of his, and so he came from that perspective that you could do great things with a recorder. So he kind of got me started. But it was listening. He introduced me to a couple of recordings. He said, you should go away and listen to this guy called Franz Bruggen. And I hadn't heard of him. And I, went down and managed to find a record in my record store of a Dutchman who was playing the recorder like a god. It was extraordinary sound. And at age 13, I still remember the moment I first heard that. And it was like a light bulb went on in my head of just, this is what I've got to do.
Wow.
And, wow. So it was always there in the background in my teens. I became obsessed with listening to these, particularly the Dutch recorder scene. It was kind of where it was all happening back then in the 70s, and it was it was just this most amazing sound world. And you don't know what it is. Why is it that one particular instrument just turns that light on? I don't know why it is, but it did for me.
Yeah, given how many instruments are in an orchestra.
Sure, and of course the recorder is in an orchestra, so it was something. I think maybe because it was something a bit niche as well.
So
what appealed to me.
And did it sort of occur to you quite quickly, or did it become evident quite quickly that you had a real natural affinity with it? Or
yeah, I guess it did. I mean, as a young teenager, you don't really know. You're just doing it, but I guess I got quite good quite quickly. And that carried on. But I was never, because I didn't do any kind of traditional music trade. I wasn't like one of the musos at school, who are the orchestral people. I never did a music O-level or anything like that. I just played the recorder, and the rest of my time academically was all sciences. And that's where I ended up going to study at university. I did physics at uni. And it was only kind of when I got stuck into that, I thought, hang on a second, I'm missing a trick here. There's something I want to do with my life, and this isn't it. By which time I was playing a lot, just practicing in my student room to the irritation of everyone around me, and so I formed a little kind of Baroque combo just out of people at uni, and we started giving a few gigs, and it all took off from there.
That's amazing.
Went on from there to music college for a year, and that's where I got started.
Especially given that, as you just mentioned, you were studying sciences, and that's quite a very different path to take from a science path.
Yeah,
music.
It is. I mean, people do say that maths and music go together, and I guess there is some connection because music is sound waves and physics, and so there's something in there. and I think having a logical mathematical part of my brain that's functioning quite well made it easy for me to kind of learn and memorize and analyze what I was doing. So
Mm.
there's some connection. And the other thing that really fascinated me when I was a kid growing up was all things paranormal, particularly UFOs, and what's the meaning of it, what's out there.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's funny, these things kind of come full circle, because when you get really deeply involved in music, you realize there's not really a distinction between the really sort of out there stuff
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
creative music, which is a complete, it's an ineffable art. We don't know what it is and what it means, but it somehow works on some really profound level.
Do you find, performing and,
Yeah.
and practicing is like a meditation for you, or?
Yeah, it is completely. And I've kind of always been sort of interested in meditation, but I've never really found a practice that works for me or that I'm patient enough with. But actually just getting into practicing, and the sort of creative thoughts that come into your head when you're in that zone are completely unlike anything else. So it definitely triggers that part of the brain or the psyche, I think,
Mm.
and it quietens down the other parts that are chattering at us all the time.
Yeah,
So I think
exactly. That's
that's
it.
one of the great beauties of being a musician. And we have that opportunity to really get into that moment, and I think it's definitely a really great bridge into that part of life. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of people maybe struggle to find that if they haven't got a music or a craft or something which is completely right-brained, or which marries right and left brain together.
What role do you feel the arts at large, plays in the world today? Because obviously, we need all the help we can get at the moment in lots of ways. So, ha, you know, what role do you think it's playing these days, specifically?
Certainly from a kind of educational level, there are so many studies that show that kids that play music are all round better in so many aspects of, even in completely unrelated subjects, their brains are developed so much better. So it shows that this kind of right brain is so important to us. And I think what's so wrong and strange, and you could get a bit suspicious of whether this is deliberate or not, but this seeming attempt to shut down those parts of our mind which you feel society and education is doing systematically, cutting
Mm-hmm.
down the arts. And you think, well, why would they do that? I mean, if they're taking it from the perspective that the science subjects are kind of more important, and the art
Mm,
subject, they say in this country, soft subjects. They're stopping all the soft subjects or making them harder to get onto or harder to get funding for.
mm, mm.
And yet, almost every level you look at it from, that seems completely wrong,
Yeah,
because from the point of view that, as I said, this is actually helping people develop even greater intellect if they want to go down that left brain path. If you've got your right brain sort of fizzing as well, you're going to have more insights.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
And then, from an economic point of view, it makes no sense. I mean, my daughter went to the Coldplay concert in Wembley the other day, and there was, I don't know how many nights they were playing, and there was 85,000 people there every night, all paying over £200.
yeah.
It's a massive, great, pump to the economy. So from that point of view, it makes no sense.
Mm,
I
mm.
wonder why it is that we're being kind of shut down. And I'm always suspicious that it is precisely because of what we've just said, because it is actually allowing us to be sort of greater, more spiritual versions of ourselves.
Mm.
The arts and music in all the different forms, and those people who may want to rule and dictate our lives, that's not very convenient for them.
Yeah, I was watching a video you did a few years ago, and I think it was in Glastonbury. It was called "The Dangerous Musician,"
Yeah,
and
that's right.
I really enjoyed watching that video. And there was numerous points out of that video that really stuck out, but one of them was a point about how musicians, and you can remind me what it was exactly, but something to the effect that musicians mix with all walks of life, and therefore makes them dangerous. Or what was it? Something
Yeah,
along those lines?
yeah. That originated. It was actually attributed to McCarthy, I think, but it turned out to be much earlier than that. It was a letter from the Prince of Belgium to Queen Victoria, and it said musicians are dangerous. You shouldn't really mix with musicians because they're, they can spread dangerous ideas.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's partly because because as musicians we mix with all different strata of society. I mean, I've played to Prince Charles, and yet
Right.
at the other end, just doing a gig to anybody. It's played a few festival gigs to whatever mud-soaked people are still
Yeah.
there listening. So it's kind of everything, all and everything, and that I think that musicians, we have this, we kind of cross between different realms.
Mm.
Sometimes in my touring life, I've been treated like royalty, and sometimes you're trying to get changed, in a prefabricated toilet somewhere before,
Yeah, yeah.
So it's all and everything. So you get used to that whole range. You never get too, well, most musicians are quite humble, we accept this.
Yeah, yeah.
Most musicians don't earn a lot of money either. So from that financial demographic, we're pretty low down. We're pretty much kind of working class, and yet we're often mixing with the ruling classes.
Yeah,
So
very interesting.
that's part of it. But I think also on an esoteric level, and I think it's something I came to in that talk actually, which has always really interested me, which is the musicians is like the trickster.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the trickster is a kind of mythological concept, and the trickster god turns up in all kinds of different cultures.
Yeah.
And it's like basically stops society from getting too fixed, because the trickster manages to move between all the different realms,
Mm.
spiritual and earthly, and then, as we just said, the different realms of society. And he kind of messes with people's heads in a very kind of fun and light way.
Yeah.
And this is what causes society to actually be able to move on to the next level, as opposed
Mhm.
to getting stuck in a path. And I think, it's so important at the moment. I feel the world's stuck on a trajectory that, I don't really want to be on, to be
Mm.
honest. And I think it's really, really important that musicians step up to the mark,
Mm.
and they don't just obey all the rules that society's laid down, and they start to, they start to be a lot more creative, not only with the
Mm.
music they make, but with how they live their lives. I mean, I found it disappointing over the last couple of years seeing how many musicians have simply complied with all the rules that have been laid out for them,
Mm.
and I've realised that so many people who go, people are going into classical music. A lot of people, they're going because they like to be told what to do. They like to follow a set of rules, and this is how you do it because this is what this whatever tradition tells you, or this is how the composer would have played it, and we know that because of this,
Yeah.
and it becomes a more like a left brain process.
Mm.
And I've just realized how many are caught in that paradigm
Yeah.
of basically someone else knows better. What I need to do is follow their rules, and then all will be well in the world. All will be nice and neat and orderly. Whereas I think the idea that we break it up is
Mm.
what is where it becomes really interesting.
Yeah.
So we never get too stuck in one way of thinking.
The interesting, or one of the many interesting things about yourself is that you're a big part of that classical world, but um, to me, it feels like you think very differently to what we touched on a little while ago. And the way I've seen that physically play out is in your actual live performances. Um, I remember seeing your group Red Priest in Sydney long time ago. Not only was the music amazing and your performances, all of you were virtuosic in your performance, but the energy and the zest and the sheer I don't know, joie de vivre that was part of the performance of Red Priest. The not like the whole audience was just rapt, and it was a wonderful thing to witness. So I think of you as a really, breaking the mold of any kind of classical musician. I'm sure you get this a lot, um, and where did that come from? Did you always have such a natural live performance thing in you, or?
I guess to some extent I did, but part of it was, part of it I guess was almost consciously developed. Part of it was seeing. I mean, I'd certainly witnessed the few classical musicians out there who do really kind of give it one in that kind of way and really express what they're doing with their bodies in a organic, natural way, not the kind of pretentious learned way, but people you feel the music really coming up through them. I'd witnessed one or two of those and thought, wow, that's the way to go. And I do remember in my kind of early career, I literally would practice that. I literally watch it. Because I mean, it sounds a bit contrived, but it felt really important, because what I witnessed when I saw these people was such a natural, full body expression.
Yeah.
And I guess I wanted to emulate that. I mean, when you're learning, that's all you're doing anyway, is you're emulating what you see. And I think when I started out trying to make a profession, I mean, I came from a place, I had no musical, didn't come from a musical family. As I said, I had virtually no formal musical training. And I felt, I felt like a fish out of water, really, in the classical music world, because I didn't know anything, I mean, you said you can't read music. I mean, my musical knowledge was extremely limited. And so I think it's almost like I kind of wanted to compensate for that. And I was thinking, who am I to have a career doing this? I mean, playing a recorder, what a wacko thing to do with your life. So,
Yeah.
It didn't, I wasn't exactly following a well-trodden career path, and there was hardly anyone doing it in this country at the time. And I guess I thought, what can I do that would be different? So quite often when you feel like, sometimes creativity comes out of constrictions. So I think, almost if you're looking at something from an economic point of view, which part of me was, my dad was a businessman, so he was always talking about, how you're going to make money at this, son, that kind of pep talk. And so, even though I'm hopelessly disorganized, nonetheless, a little bit of that did seep in. And I thought, he always used to talk about what's your USP, unique selling point. So I don't know. But, you start to think in that way. And I realized that in the past, even the musicians at the time, the composers in the 17th, 18th century, they had to sell their wares as much as we do now. And we forget that aspect. And they were always thinking of new ideas and new ways to get the music out. And so there's kind of nothing wrong in it, because it's just how kind of 3D society works. But where I'm going with this is, I had seen that there were some really good players, like the Frans Bruggen, the guy I mentioned earlier in Holland, and all of his kind of disciples. And, and I was thinking, who am I? I haven't had that training. I don't. So it's like, well, I can't do that. And I can't, these things have been done already. So hang on, here's something. No one's tried this angle yet, so I'll do this. And to start off with, the first part of my career, I was doing a lot of, I thought, right, I'm going to see what you can do. I'm going to arrange all this wacky kind of mad 19th century virtuoso violin music and just whatever I could get my hands on, and just go down a different path, because most of the recorder players at the time were going down, they're either going down this historical early music path, or they were going the other end of the spectrum. The recorder suddenly was reinvented as a kind of contemporary music instrument played in clubs in Amsterdam, but really what we call squeaky gate music, that really just atonal, horrible noise music. And there wasn't really much going on in between the two. So they were both kind of quite what's the word? Esoteric in a way, or to the general public.
Yeah.
So I try and find something a bit more mainstream. But it was non-mainstream because I was doing it on a recorder. And so I thought, so that's where I started. But then that had some success in my 20s doing that and developing some interesting programs. But then the idea of a group, and in fact, when I got together with my now ex-partner Julia, and we formed, we wanted to work together. And she played the Baroque fiddle and I played the recorders. We thought, let's just make a little quartet. And I just imagined it would be like a hobby quartet. We'd just like do the odd gig every now and then just for fun. But, it really took off once we got going. Once we thought, and it was a case again of kind of which areas interest us and what's not been done yet, and what could we do that would really shake things up a bit.
Isn't it great that there was enough interest in what you were doing, and enough, obviously there was, good feedback and good response to allow you to grow that. That must have been exciting at the time. Yeah,
it really was. And it's, once you find that niche and then you really go for it like that, it's really exciting what can happen. And I think that's what happened with Red Priest, because I think we suddenly sort of hit the golden mean, and we went straight in there, and yeah, that was when my career really took off, and we started touring the States regularly, and went all around the world, and that was a really exciting, creative 15 years or so in my life, where we were doing that a lot. And most of the time, the creative process was quite organic, because once we decided we were going to take so many aspects of historical music performance, and when you look back at that, that is much more kind of out there and performance based and esoteric than most people would think.
Yeah.
But so many people present that as like a museum piece, behind a glass case. This is how it was done, and that's that. But actually, it wasn't how it was at all at the time, which maybe we'll get onto in a minute. But we were going to take aspects of that, but then we were going to throw in whatever we felt like into the mix. We just let's lay ourselves completely open, and what drops in, this piece, it's a piece by Vivaldi, but you know what? This sounds a little bit like a piece of gypsy music, so let's chuck in some offbeat fiddle chords and see where that takes us. And kind of wherever it went, we allowed it to go. And that was what I think set us apart from all the other groups. So we just held this slightly uncomfortable place on the edge of the sort of early music world, where, because we were playing sort of period instrument, we became accepted grudgingly.
What was the attitude of the classical world? Were they a little bit bemused, or were they did they recognize the brilliance of the performance and go, this is undeniable, this is amazing, like the rest of us did?
Yeah, it was mixed. I mean, it was a bit of both of those. There are some places where we got repeat bookings year on year because of the latter. They really loved it, and there are other places where there was some academic musician in charge and wouldn't touch us with a budge pole. So it was, it was a mixture. And we've had, and generally speaking, most of the reviews and press we've had has been in one camp or the other. I mean, we've been absolutely panned.
Really?
For some, we do, yeah. There was a particular American record magazine which used to just slate everything we did with the most kind of, exotic language, and just really. And not just one reviewer, like the whole magazine had it in for us. And I ended up getting into a massive great spat with the reviewer, which they then published, to their credit, they published, what I wrote and what he wrote. And I don't often take it from reviewers. It's like, but so much of what people say is actually wrong. So if you go back to what I was saying about how, so many aspects of what life was like in those days. I mean, it was, performance was so different from now. The formal kind of, you sit down in your bow tie and play 6 sonatas in a row and everyone goes home feeling, a bit worthy and probably a bit bored.
Yeah.
But, it wasn't like that. I mean, there's, you probably heard tales of kind of, music and theatre in Shakespeare's time where the people, throwing things and pissing on the audience, just everything going on. And there's even one record of a concert in a church where a farmer took a whole flock of sheep through the church because it was the way through to the field during the concert. So it's fantastic. So it was kind of quite a messy affair. And then some of the musicians were clearly out there. You read descriptions of them playing and they were completely transported, unrecognizable. And you think it's more like a, modern day rock musician. That's what it was. People think that like if you're an 18th century person, then you're one particular type of person. But in fact, presumably there were the same range of people as there are now.
Yeah.
So there would have been rule breakers and there would have been more, formal musicians, and it's the whole range. So, you just pitch your tent wherever you're comfortable.
It's probably a bit like the artistic license I'm sure they took when they made that Amadeus film back in the 80s, was it? Like he was they portrayed him as pretty out there, but who knows? Maybe he was. It's just a mad genius, maybe.
Yeah, well, actually, Vivaldi too. Because we named our group Red Priest after Vivaldi. He was known as the Red Priest, and we actually had an opportunity to go to Venice. Long story, I won't go into, but it was a paid trip to Venice, and we got to meet the woman who ran the Vivaldi Museum, who it turned out was this little Cockney woman from the East End of London who used to be a photographer at Wimbledon. So I don't know how she ended up. I don't know how she ended up running the Vivaldi Museum, but but she was a mine of knowledge about Vivaldi, and she was completely scathing of the way the reverence with which musicians treat him, and he said he just wasn't like that at all. She said in terms of tennis, he was like John McEnroe. She said,
right.
And she said, "Do you want authentic? I'll tell you authentic," she said. And she pointed to some record of a concert when an orchestra went to play in a convent. It's a male orchestra went to play in a convent. At the end of the concert, they all turned around and mooned at the audience, dropped their trousers, and mooned at the nuns.
Fantastic.
I mean, it's yeah. So it just goes to show it was, we hold these things in such great reverence,
Yeah. Yeah.
but the
Yeah.
whole thing is a lot dirtier than that in every way.
I was having a look through your review page on your website, and I mean, basically they were expressing all the things I felt the night I saw you at Angel Place, I think it was, in Sydney. It's just amazing. There must have been, I'm sure there've been many moments in your career where you've just thought, I'm a recorder player, albeit probably the world's best recorder player. There must have been lots of surreal moments when you reflected on how far you'd come since thinking, I might stick with this recorder and see where it gets me. I mean, it must have been quite mind-blowing, a lot of the special moments you would have had along the way, no doubt.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm still in a state of surprise. I got this far through life, and I've basically lived off playing the recorder. I mean, that in itself is just
Amazing.
like, wow, that's mind blowing.
It's amazing.
And so, but yeah, no, been some moments, been some big concert hall moments or big tour moments. Yeah, I do think. I mean, it's not exactly Wembley Stadium, but within the genre that I'm working in, yeah, I've got a lot to be proud of.
Yeah. It takes a lot of courage. I mean, it's I imagine. I mean, I haven't done a lot of live performance. I've done enough to know that I'm pretty terrified before I go on, and I have to try and transmute all that energy. And I mean, I don't know what it's like with a wind instrument, but like, I remember my classical guitar teacher said, your fingers are trembling, and he said, just press really hard, just get through the first few minutes and your adrenaline will transmute it. How do you deal with the nerves, or do you feel the nerves, or are you one of these people?
No, I mean, it kind of varies. Sometimes they come up and bite you on the arse when you weren't at least expecting it, because you weren't even feeling particularly nervous. But usually it's related to how big the gig is, whether it's got some feeling of being extra important, and then also very much to how well prepared.
Yeah.
I mean, I try to over practice because you never know what's going to go wrong. And so, to be honest, in the course of my career, I've had a few disasters I don't want to think about, because I do nearly everything from memory, and it's your mind plays a trick on you that you're not expecting it's going to play. Somewhere you've never gone wrong before, suddenly you've gone off in the wrong direction, and it's how you find your way back. But so that, I mean, I think the memory aspect's almost the worst, because that is the one thing where you don't know whether it's going to go or not. But in terms of controlling the adrenaline, as a wind player, you have to learn to breathe properly. You have to learn how to use your diaphragm, because otherwise you're screwed. You're not going to get through. And I discovered that early on in my sort of playing career, that was an absolute essential. But because you're learning to breathe deeply, and that's part of the actual technique, it's almost like a part of the mechanism just calms you down anyway. So it kind of all comes from the breath, and that's really important. And a lot of players, they don't learn to breathe. I see players out there, professional players, who can't breathe properly, and I don't even know how they get through it. Yeah.
Wow.
But the quality of the breath is what creates. I mean, we talk about the big creativity, which is like doing all of the the wacko ideas and arrangements. But to me, it's like that moment between notes, which is almost the hardest thing to do on a recorder.
Right.
It's how do you do that in a way that really touches people and really says something?
Yeah.
And that is very, very subtle. It's you almost can't describe it. You can try and describe the physiological things that go on in your breath and your mouth in order to produce those little squeezes between notes, to combine groups of notes so that they're actually telling a story. And I think as I get older, I guess that does become more and more part of what I want to do moving forward. I'm not so interested in the, I mean, I've kind of proved myself in terms of the virtuoso performance on big stages. I'm kind of interested to develop the expressive side of what I do in variety of different ways. It's a big part moving forward.
Is your mastery of your music still refining itself, or do you feel like you hit some kind of mastery plateau a long time ago, and it's now just very fine degrees of increased mastery? What's that like for you?
I think that there was a, there's a definite, there are probably a couple of definite plateaus that I reached. I mean, there was,
Yeah.
one was just as a teenager, hey, look, I can play Vivaldi really fast, and that was number one. And number two was when I mastered the breath, and hang on, I can actually control what I'm doing here. And those are definite plateaus. So most of my career has been based on those two. But I'm learning new things now. I mean, obviously the last couple of years haven't been great for performing, so I've gone into myself and try to listen to what I'm doing and see where there's still room for improvement. And actually, the more you listen, the more there is. It's again in those details. And I think there have been weaknesses in my playing that I've covered up with a lot of bluster that I want to work on now and get better at.
And
It's
you'd be
even I
the
think that
person who'd know.
yeah, Pablo Casal's famous cellist I think he was about 90 when some interviewer asked him why he still practices every day, and he says, "Oh, because I think I'm getting somewhere." And so that's always there for musicians.
Yeah, I know. If people have ever said to me, what's your favorite song that you've composed, and I say, well, it's I haven't done it. It's the next one, because I'm still
Exactly.
always still trying to hit some magical thing that I'll probably never actually hit, but you're always feeling like it's the next piece, and
Yeah,
which is
exactly.
fun. It's actually part of the allure of it. Actually, I like that.
I know, it's why we keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it there's so many threads to this topic, which is why I just love it so much. But I think you touched on it in the David Acker piece. There's a beautiful
Yeah.
little story he wrote, and you can elaborate on it far better than me. But I loved the way he encapsulated that. For us to reach that magic musical moment or magical creative moment is worth 1,000 lifetimes just to become one with that. I mean,
Mm.
what's your feeling on all of that? Because that's what drives me to do the next piece I write. Anytime I do that, how does that
Yeah, no,
play out for you?
yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, the frustration of it is that it's always in the moment. And
Yes.
we're taught by the great spiritual traditions that the present moment is all it is, and
Mm.
we need to become more intensely into the moment. And I think we do have that incredible opportunity as musicians, because we can, it literally is in the middle of a note you're playing. That is the moment. That's it. It
Yeah.
doesn't get better than that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I know, I completely agree with that. And sometimes, but it's not always the case. Actually, I can there's a philosophy that I learnt about a long, long time ago from a philosopher called Castiglione, I think. Well, there were two Renaissance philosophers, Castiglione and Ficino, and they talked a lot about music back in the 1600s, I think, 1500s maybe. But the system that they came up with was a three-tier system, and it was decoro or decorum, and then this work called sprezzatura, and then grazia. And so decorum is basically hard work. So it's everything, all of the, I guess you might say, left brain parts of it, learning your instrument, learning the rules of the music, all of that stuff, all the hard work, learning a piece. And then this middle word is called sprezzatura, and it's almost like an onomatopoeia. It's just like
Mm.
surprise. It's the spontaneity. It's the human emotions. It's all of that stuff that you have to consciously put into the music. If you just learn a piece of music really well and play it,
Mm.
that's not going to give you. It's just going to, it's not going to give you a spiritual experience, because that bottom word, grazia, is the state of grace, and it's for you and for the audience.
Yeah.
It's a circle.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the idea of performance is we're trying to create this state of grace, which is this feeling of being in the moment,
Yes.
completely immersed in the moment.
Yeah.
And you can only do it via the hard work, but also the missing element for so many people is the sprezzatura, which is basically putting yourself on the line. It's consciously adding all of the human and theatrical elements and personality and everything else into the music. And then, if you're lucky, then grazia, the state of grace, may visit you, but it may not. And on
Yeah.
50% of the occasions, it doesn't, to be honest. And any other, the rest of the time, in fact, probably only 10%, you really drop into that state.
Have you been experienced that a lot over the years with so
I've
many?
definitely had, yeah, I've had moments in that state in some concerts.
Yeah.
But what I'm always doing, I mean, what you witnessed probably in the concert you came to in Sydney, you
Mm,
probably saw I put a lot of effort in. Well,
mm.
we all
Oh
do in the
yeah.
group, and
Yeah.
it's like that is the effort, the energy. To
Yeah.
me, is like trying
Yeah.
to generate this something else, something beyond just the notes of the music.
Yeah.
And it's quite, to some people that will be seen as empty gestures. Some people just, they're not going to relate to that. But I can't relate to everybody. But I
Yeah.
hope that maybe the majority of people will get something from the fact that I'm, you know,
Mm.
trying to give my energy.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, for
So
sure. Yeah.
that's part of it, and not just the really out there energy, but the expressive,
Mm.
all the different parts of it.
Mm.
And to say, as I get older, I do become more and more interested in how to express the really profound emotions in the music.
Yeah. Yeah. But the arts, and especially the way you and your groups perform, it's such a great service for people, because anything to bring people out of their everyday and into that moment, like vividly into that moment.
Music's a fantastic tool for that. It's like working with the sort of stuff of the cosmos and condensing it down. So it's really,
Mm.
really fantastic that we have that opportunity. And I think everyone can benefit from playing music. And if not playing it, then at least immersing themselves in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautifully said. I love that. Um, it's a couple of thoughts to maybe finish on this, our first conversation, and hopefully we'll have more
Yeah,
conversations in
sure.
the future.
Well up for it.
But a couple of things I'd love to just finish on. First thing, what are you most proud about? Because you've had a long, distinguished career.
Mm.
I think back to 1992 when I first met you. Um, you know, Gosh, you've achieved so much in that time. Um, so a bit of a tough question, but is there anything that really kind of jumps out for you?
That is a hard one. I mean, obviously, just the very fact that I've done all of this just playing a recorder,
Yeah.
I look at that and think that's wild. That is, just that very fact of having earned nearly all my money in my life just from playing a recorder. So that in itself, obviously creating Red Priest, which was a success, but it's often your most recent project, as you said. My next project's the one I'm really proud of, but it hasn't happened yet.
Tell us
But the
about
most
that. That was my next question, actually.
Okay, well, I'll tell you about the most recent thing I did. So I've always had this real interest because I was into kind of the esoteric back in my teens and 20s. I used to listen to quite a lot of synth-led new age type music. Like I really like that.
Yeah.
Um, and I always wanted to combine that with the recorder. I always thought, the old and the new, the
Mm.
20th, 21st century technology and this ancient, simple instrument would just combine so well. So for years in the background of my career, I was plugging away with zero sort of technical knowledge, trying to make an album which was in my head, which was some of the most beautiful Baroque slow pieces played on a recorder with MIDI synth accompaniments. And I had loads of attempts at it myself and had to teach myself, various sequencing programs, and
Mm.
never really got anywhere. And then I bumped into this guy living in Lewis in the rafters of an old ironworks, which was set up as a kind of crafts place. So there were loads of artisans living there. And I bumped into this guy called Larry, with Lawrence Potter, but he called himself Larry Lush. And he was a kind of synth artist. Like
Right.
you, he couldn't read music and he played in various bands, but he made soundscapes. So I just bumped into him. I said, look, just can you come have a listen to this, see what I'm trying to do?
Yeah.
And you know, he totally got it, and he took it and he ran with it, and we batted these pieces of music back and forth for about 5 years. He moved to Portugal in the middle of this, so
Oh
we were
wow.
still batting them back and forth,
Yeah.
and ended up with his album, which we called Bark Side of the Moon.
Ah,
And
great
that
name.
was, you know, that was my first kind of new age album, and it's,
Yeah.
yeah, it's what it said on the box, but it was really, and the creative process of that, you know, I was so much of it because I recorded all of the my recorder lines are recorded here in this little shed in my garden, which I'm sitting in at the moment.
Yeah.
And I remember that process probably rather like you have when you're recording. It's my only experience of sitting there with my cans on, going
Yeah.
over and over and over, trying to get the absolute perfection,
Yeah.
and then maybe a little bit of MIDI tweaking to tune them a bit better and all of that stuff. And so, you know, and it was just, that was my in the now moment.
Yes.
And the album is something I'm really proud of. It's complete opposite from the out there Red Priest stuff. It's
Yeah.
much, you know, it's kind of melancholic, I suppose.
Right.
But
Reflective.
really, definitely reflective. But you know, that's a big part of what music's there for, is to help us to express these emotions. You can bring them through and out. And
Yeah. Oh
I
yeah.
went through quite a difficult phase of my life after I produced it, and you know, listening to, I know it sounds a bit a bit what, conceited or something, but I found listening to this, because it was my creative process, it really helped me through that.
Right.
And so that's something, you know, I'm really, I'd say that's probably the album I'm most proud of, even though for most of my kind of audience expecting me to be producing fireworks, they probably wouldn't really get it.
Yeah. Wow. That's really interesting. Are you developing Baroque Alchemy at the
Yeah, that's
moment?
right. So
Yeah.
this is come out of this. So, you know, probably probably my two greatest projects, the one that I've done in the past and the one that is going to happen now, have actually been produced out of love, because my first project was with my partner Julia, and that was Red Priest, as I said. So that had its
Yeah.
whole lifetime. And my new partner Lindy is a wonderful keyboardist. I'm sure she'll be really embarrassed if she's listening to this, but she's an amazing keyboardist. And we you know, I brought this idea to her of combining recorder and synth. She got it immediately. It was amazing. She said she had that spine tingling moment where she was in one of the schools she was teaching in, and I said, like, I've always had this idea of having this like French harpsichord music played on a synth. And she said, oh, okay, well. And then she's just still wearing a coat, and she was her pupil hadn't arrived yet, and she stuffed her iPhone on and took out a piece of 17th century harpsichord music and just played it on the school synthesizer, whatever it was, some Casio or something,
Yeah.
and sent it to me. And literally my hairs went on the back of my neck, because it was exactly what I'd been imagining. And it's how the old and the new meet. So we're now taking the ethos of the Bark Side of the Moon, and we are developing it into a live show. We've done a couple of gigs so far, but you know, not just slow music. This is like right across the board. It's anything
Yeah.
and everything. Using the synths both as, you know, a synth can be any instrument you want it to be, and in the hands of a skilled player, you know, it can sound pretty authentic.
Yeah. Yeah.
But also, you know, so part of it's that, and the other part is, let's see what a synth does, you know, or the range of kind
Mm.
of bass age sounds.
Atmospheres and moods.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
yeah, we're kind of just at the beginning of the journey, but already it's, you know, it's got a lot of promise. So this feels like my next musical journey.
Fantastic. And there's been a good response to that
Yeah,
early
that was,
already?
yeah, first couple of gigs, people have loved it, and I think what's great about it is it's. I mean, the very first gig we did was in a kind of club in Lewis called the Zoo, sort of town I live in, Zoo Studios. Amazing, esoteric, out there, alternative venue,
Yeah.
and it was. I don't think anybody in the audience had ever, probably hardly any of them ever listened to any classical music, let alone a recorder. And you know,
Yeah.
we had some amazing comments afterwards. So I've always thought that this music, you know, has the ability to go to different audiences, to your kind of,
Mm.
you know, hippie festival audiences and
Mm.
anybody else. So, you know, that I'm really excited that
Yeah.
this putting it into this new context could
Yeah.
take what I've done in that whole new direction.
Yeah. Good luck with that. That sounds, as you say, very exciting. I look forward to hearing, you know, as you record pieces and there's
Mm.
material to hear. Look forward to that very much. Thank you so much for having a chat with me today. I really appreciate it. Always great to
Yeah, it's a real
catch up.
pleasure.
I feel
Yeah.
like we've kind of scratched the surface, and you know, one of the things I've really loved already early days of doing this podcast is meeting new friends, but also catching up with long lost friends from a long time ago. And so it's been amazing for helping me do just that. And thanks again for joining me, and maybe we can do another one down the track sometime.
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Okay, thanks a lot, Piers.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Cheers, mate.